The intruder in the storage shed. The vast expanse of rural Michigan stretched out around me, an ocean of trees and farmland that seemed to swallow up any sense of civilization. At 13, I was already accustomed to long stretches of solitude on our sprawling 3-acre property. My parents, trusting in my maturity and sense of responsibility, often left me to my own devices for hours or even days at a time. On this particular weekend, I found myself alone once again, lost in the virtual world of Vice City on my PS2. The house creaked and settled around me, its familiar sounds a comforting backdrop to my gaming session. But as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the yard, an unfamiliar sound shattered my sense of security. A loud, metallic bang echoed from somewhere outside, jolting me out of my digital trance. My heart rate instantly doubled as I scrambled to check every window, searching for the source of the disturbance. At first, I saw nothing amiss in the deepening twilight. Then, as I peered out towards the storage building that stood like a sentinel at the edge of our property, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The heavy door, which I knew for a fact had been securely closed, now stood wide open. With trembling hands, I retrieved the rifle from its hiding place in the closet. The weight of the weapon felt both reassuring and terrifying as I stepped out into the cool evening air. "Who's in there?" I called out, trying to keep the fear from my voice. Only silence answered me. As I approached the storage building, my senses on high alert, I announced my armed presence once more. Still no response. The doorway yawned before me, a black maw that seemed to devour what little light remained. I knew that building like the back of my hand. The sit-down mower, the quad, countless tools and lawn care items. But in that moment, each familiar object transformed into a potential hiding place for an unseen intruder. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the vulnerability of my position. Anyone, or anything, could be lurking in those shadows, waiting to pounce. The bravado that had propelled me this far evaporated in an instant. I slammed the door shut and retreated to the relative safety of the house, my heart pounding in my ears. Once inside, I locked the door and took up vigil by the window, my eyes fixed on the storage building. I kept expecting to see that door swing open at any moment, to catch a glimpse of whatever malevolent presence had invaded our property. But as minutes stretched into hours, nothing stirred. Just as I was beginning to convince myself it had all been a product of my overactive imagination, a new sound sent fresh waves of terror coursing through me. Creaks, unmistakable footsteps, from the floor above. My mind raced. Had someone been lying in wait inside the house this whole time? Or had they somehow slipped past me while I was fixated on the storage building? Either possibility was terrifying. I gripped the rifle tighter, its cold metal offering little comfort against the horror unfolding around me. Summoning every ounce of courage I possessed, I crept up the stairs, wincing at every groan of the old wood beneath my feet. The upstairs hallway stretched before me, 5 closed doors concealing untold dangers. I dropped to my knees, peering under the crack of my parents' bedroom door. What I saw turned my insides to ice, 2 bare feet, facing away from the door. Someone was in there, standing motionless, perhaps listening just as intently as I was. In that moment, the full weight of my situation crashed down upon me. This wasn't a game or a movie. This was real, and I was woefully unprepared to face it. Panic overrode any lingering thoughts of heroism. I scrambled back downstairs and barricaded myself in the bathroom, fumbling with shaking hands to dial 911. As I whispered my desperate plea for help to the operator, heavy footsteps descended the stairs. They approached the bathroom door with deliberate slowness, each step drawing out the agony of anticipation. Then, a deep voice that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. "What's up, kid?" I nearly choked on my own feet, struggling to form words. Against the operator's instructions, I found my voice. "I'm on the phone with the cops right now, and I have a gun." I blurted out, putting the call on speaker as proof. The intruder tried the door handle, finding it locked. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought he might try to break it down. But then I heard his footsteps retreating, followed by the slam of the back door. When the police finally arrived, it felt like emerging from a waking nightmare. The house was clear, the intruder long gone. But the sanctuary of my home had been irrevocably shattered. As I rode to my uncle's house that night, unable to bear staying in a place so thoroughly violated, one thought kept echoing through my mind: it was my fault. In my haste to investigate the storage building, I had left the back door unlocked, practically inviting danger into our home. That night marked the end of my childhood innocence. Never again would I take the safety of four walls and a locked door for granted. The world had revealed its darker nature, and I had come face to face with the chilling reality that sometimes, the monsters we fear are all too human. The stalker next door. The lazy days of summer stretched endlessly before me as my parents embarked on their week-long anniversary trip. At 18, I relished the freedom of having our sprawling, wooded property all to myself. Little did I know that this idyllic solitude would soon transform into a waking nightmare. Our home sat nestled among the trees, a long dirt driveway connecting us to the quiet back road that wound through our rural community. It was the kind of place where everyone knew their neighbors, where a trip to the local gas station meant familiar faces and friendly greetings. That sense of small-town comfort was about to be shattered in the most terrifying way imaginable. It began innocuously enough. I was filling up my car at the gas station when a black Jeep Cherokee pulled up to the adjacent pump. The driver, a man with a neatly trimmed goatee, offered a friendly hello as he began to fuel up. When he asked for directions to the interstate, I thought nothing of it, happily providing the information as he jotted it down in a notepad. Looking back, the red flags were there. Why use a notepad instead of a phone? Why ask my name as we parted ways? But in the moment, lulled by the familiar rhythms of small-town life, I brushed aside any niggling doubts. It wasn't until I turned onto our property, watching that same black Jeep continue past in my rearview mirror, that a faint unease began to creep over me. He was heading in the complete opposite direction of the interstate. But surely it was just a coincidence, a simple wrong turn. I pushed the encounter from my mind as I settled in for a quiet evening at home. That night, as I was leaving to meet up with friends, the first true stirrings of fear took root. Footsteps, too deliberate to be an animal, crunched through the underbrush near our house. I hurried to my car, telling myself it was just my imagination running wild in the darkness. But when I returned home hours later, a voice called out from the woods, "Kate." My name, spoken by an unseen presence in the night, sent chills racing down my spine. I fled inside, my mind whirling with possibilities. It had to be a neighbor, I reasoned, though none lived close enough to casually call out like that. When I called my parents, they echoed this explanation, assuring me it was probably nothing to worry about. But the next night, as I was once again heading out to meet friends, that voice called my name again. This time, there was no mistaking the menace behind it. I ran back inside and called 911, my hands shaking as I relayed my fears to the dispatcher. The police came, did a cursory search of the property, and left with a promise to keep an eye out. Their presence did little to quell the growing dread in the pit of my stomach. The following evening, I returned home late from my job at a nearby restaurant. Exhaustion weighed heavily on me as I made my way from the car to the front door. That's when I heard it again, footsteps, closer this time. And then that voice, chilling in its false friendliness. "Kate, don't call the cops on me again, cutie." Terror coursed through me as I fumbled with my keys, practically falling through the front door in my haste to get inside. I called the police again, my voice trembling as I recounted this latest, most brazen encounter. But what could they really do? Search the woods again, only to find nothing? At my parents' insistence, I decided to spend the night at my friend Alex's house. As I packed a bag, I kept a wary eye on the windows, half expecting to see a face peering in at any moment. The coast seemed clear as I made a dash for my car. But just as I turned the key in the ignition, a figure materialized out of the darkness. A man wearing a face mask slammed his hand against my driver's side window, trying to force the door open. I couldn't even scream, terror closing my throat as I threw the car into drive. The sound of his fist pounding against the glass echoed in my ears as I sped down the driveway, tears blurring my vision. The drive to Alex's house was a blur of panic and adrenaline. I sobbed into the phone as her father stayed on the line with me, assuring me that help was on the way. When I finally pulled into their driveway, collapsing into Alex's arms, the full weight of what had just happened hit me like a physical blow. The police were called yet again, this time treating the situation with the gravity it deserved. As I gave my statement, recounting not just this terrifying encounter but all the strange occurrences of the past few days, a horrifying realization dawned on me. The man at the gas station, the one who had so casually asked my name, He had followed me home that day. He had been watching me, learning my routines, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. My parents cut their trip short, rushing home to a daughter forever changed by fear. The sanctuary of our home had been irreparably violated. Every rustle of leaves in the night, every unexpected sound, became a potential threat. I found myself jumping at shadows, unable to shake the feeling of being watched even in broad daylight. Months later, as I packed up my things to move into my own apartment, I couldn't help but reflect on how a single, seemingly innocent encounter had spiraled into such a nightmare. The lesson was seared into my very being: trust your instincts, be aware of your surroundings, and never, ever give out personal information to strangers. For in this world, there are predators who wear the mask of friendliness, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The midnight visitors. The house stood silent and empty, my family away for reasons I can no longer recall. At 15 or 16, I relished these rare moments of complete solitude, losing myself in the digital realms of StarCraft and other PC games. Little did I know that on this particular night, the line between the virtual battles on my screen and the very real danger lurking outside would blur in the most terrifying way imaginable. It began with the doorbell, its chime cutting through the ambient sounds of my game like a knife. Annoyed at the interruption, I hurried to answer, not wanting to be away from my match for too long. "Who is it?" I called through the closed door, adhering to the safety rules drilled into me since childhood. A soft, barely audible voice responded from the other side. Curiosity overrode caution, and I opened the door, leaving the storm door latched as a final barrier between myself and the stranger outside. An older woman stood on the porch, a wide smile plastered across her face. Her hands were hidden behind her back, a detail that would only later strike me as deeply unsettling. "Can I help you?" I asked, an uneasy feeling beginning to creep over me despite her seemingly harmless appearance. "I need to use a phone," she replied, her smile never wavering. "Can I come inside?" Alarm bells began to ring in my head. Never let a stranger into the house. It was one of the cardinal rules my parents had instilled in me. But how to turn away this apparently helpless old woman without seeming rude? I directed her to the library a few blocks away, knowing full well it would be closed at this hour but desperate for any excuse to end this increasingly uncomfortable encounter. Her reaction sent a chill down my spine. "That's very rude to turn away an old lady asking for help," she said, her tone at odds with the frozen smile still fixed on her face. As I stammered out an apology, citing house rules about strangers, that smile began to take on a more sinister aspect. I closed the door slowly, unable to shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. I had barely made it back to my room when the doorbell rang again. There was no way I was opening that door a second time. I tried to lose myself back in my game, to pretend that the strange encounter had never happened. But then came a new sound, a metallic tapping at my bedroom window. My blood ran cold as I realized the implications. My room was the only one with a light on, a beacon in the darkness. Had the old woman really circled around to my window? The thought was too terrifying to contemplate. I fled to the living room, sitting in the darkness as the doorbell rang again and again, each chime sending fresh waves of panic through me. When silence finally fell, I convinced myself it was over. Maybe she had given up, realizing no one would answer. But then came a new voice at the door, a man this time, claiming to be looking for his mother. He apologized, explaining she had dementia and had wandered away from home. For a moment, I felt a pang of guilt. Had I turned away someone who genuinely needed help? But when he too asked to come inside, that nagging sense of wrongness returned full force. I directed him to the backyard, claiming I had heard noises there earlier. He thanked me and walked away, but when I checked the backyard moments later, there was no sign of him or the old woman. As night deepened, exhaustion began to overtake fear. I crawled into bed, leaving the TV on for comfort. Just as I was drifting off to sleep, that metallic tapping returned, louder this time, more insistent. Remembering the man's story about his mother, I decided to try and help. I lifted the blind, ready to direct her to her son. What I saw froze the breath in my lungs. The old woman stood there, that unnerving smile still fixed in place. But now I could see what she had been hiding behind her back, a large kitchen knife, its blade glinting in the moonlight as she tapped it against my window. I dropped the blind and scrambled back into bed, my heart threatening to burst from my chest. The doorbell began to ring incessantly, the sound now taking on a frantic, almost angry quality. I buried myself under the covers, squeezing my eyes shut and praying for it all to be over. Morning came, bringing with it blessed silence. When I recounted the night's events to my father, he praised my decision not to open the door. But as we pieced together the strange details, the coordinated appearance of the woman and the man, their insistence on entering the house, the knife at the window, a chilling picture emerged. This had been no confused elderly woman and her concerned son. It was a carefully orchestrated attempt to gain entry to our home, with who knows what sinister intentions. The incident left an indelible mark on me. For months afterward, every unexpected sound in the night had me bolt upright in bed, convinced that they had returned to finish whatever they had started. The sanctity of our home had been violated, the illusion of safety within its walls forever shattered. Years later, I still find myself checking and rechecking locks, peering out windows at the slightest unusual noise. For I now know the truth that most prefer to ignore, that sometimes the greatest dangers come not from strangers in dark alleys, but from those who present themselves as harmless, even helpful. They are the wolves in sheep's clothing, waiting for that one moment of trust, that single lapse in judgment, to strike. So to anyone reading this, I implore you, trust your instincts. When something feels off, when that little voice in the back of your mind whispers that something isn't right, listen to it. For in that moment of hesitation, of politeness overriding caution, true horror can find its way into the sanctity of your home. And once invited in, it may never truly leave.